Subcommittee will come to order. This is the hearing of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia Pacific and the Global Environment. And today we have as our special guest the Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, the Honorable Kurt Campbell, here with us. As it is the practice, the chairman and the ranking member usually are provided or to give opening statements, and in the process too we should be getting more members coming in from their respective offices or having other meetings. So if I may, my good friend, the ranking member, is tied up in a markup at the Financial Services Committee, my good friend Congressman Manzullo, as I'm sure that he'll be here shortly. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your efforts and those of Secretary Clinton and President Obama in upgrading our relations with the Asia-Pacific region. Your collective efforts have delivered demonstrable positive results. Indeed, with few exceptions, I believe this administration has done an excellent job in its first year managing relations with this most dynamic and important region. For example, despite the challenges posed by China, this administration has defied the practice of many of its predecessors by getting off to a positive start with Beijing. Beijing's relatively mild response to weapons sales to Taiwan and the visit by the Dalai Lama, I believe, reflects the maturation of our ties, particularly as a result of the strategic and economic dialogue and other high-level interactions, as well as relative calm in the Taiwan Straits with President Ma's election. However, there is also cause for concern regarding issues ranging from Copenhagen to Google. Yet I believe the maturation of the U.S.-China relationship also suggests China's own interests in peace and security as the country attempts to maintain internal social stability by meeting the economic and increasingly social and political demands for its 1.3 billion citizens. There is no doubt that China's artificially weak currency and the country's position on Iran will pose difficult problems this year. But if both sides hew to a positive, cooperative, and comprehensive U.S.-China relationship, I'm sure, as agreed last year, I believe we can work things out. Meanwhile, as the Congressional Research Service has noted, and I quote, relations between the United States and South Korea arguably have been at their best state in nearly a decade. Last year's joint vision statement provided an important marker in the evolution of the bilateral relationship towards a truly global orientation. On North Korea, our two countries are working as closely as ever, which is critically important in transmitting wartime operational control from the United States to Korea in the near future. And with Seoul chairing the G20 this year, the Republic of Korea has a vital role to play in supporting international growth and development. That said, I'm concerned that if the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement remains in limbo, the effect could become increasingly corrosive. That is why I fully support the timely passage of the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, hopefully, between our two governments. On U.S.-Japan ties, a subject this subcommittee will address specifically in a hearing in 2 weeks, remained on a solid footing despite a degree of media hyperventilation over basing issues, host nation support, and potential changes in Japan's foreign policy. With the Democratic Party of Japan in power for the first time in 50 years, we need to demonstrate patience, a word you have wisely reiterated in recent weeks. So long as we are guided by our shared interests and our broad, deep, and enduring ties, I believe we will find mutually satisfactory answers to basing and other issues, especially on the problem with Okinawa. In Southeast Asia, your team has made important strides in reversing the previous administration's neglect of the region. Last year's initiation of a long-needed policy changing, permitting U.S. engagement with Myanmar, which you personally took the lead and Secretary Clinton's signing of the ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation set the stage for enhanced relations with the region. President Obama's participation in a first-ever U.S.-ASEAN summit and his personal links to Indonesia, including his trip there and the full launch of the U.S.-Indonesia Comprehensive Partnership later this month, will further bolster our ties. However, I urge you, Mr. Secretary, to make continuing human rights abuses in West Papua a priority as we develop the partnership. Meanwhile, our alliances in Thailand and the Philippines remain robust, as do our diplomatic, economic, and security relations with Singapore and Malaysia. U.S. interactions with Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia have become increasingly cooperative, and the fact that Vietnam is chairing ASEAN this year offers an effective means of strengthening ties. Our relations with Cambodia have deepened, particularly after last year's lifting of the ban on direct assistance to the Cambodian government and on export-import bank financing for U.S. companies seeking to do business in Phnom Penh as well as in Laos. As we discussed last week, I strongly advocate forgiving Cambodia its debt in order to improve that country's economy and to address the legacies of war. Toward that end, I also believe we should take a more proactive stance in funding demining operations in Laos and in addressing the tragic effects of Agent Orange in Vietnam. In addition, I hope we can complement our diplomatic, political, and strategic overtures in Southeast Asia with real progress on trade, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership on other initiatives with individual Southeast Asian countries and ASEAN as a whole, and ultimately a free trade area in this region. In the Pacific, the administration has been on the right mark with Secretary Clinton's meeting with Pacific Island leaders during the UN General Assembly. And as you noted, Mr. Secretary, her commitment to holding such meetings annually is a great improvement. You're having moved forward on an initiative, I believe, pursued for more than a decade, returning USAID to the Pacific Islands through the $13 million requested for FY 2011, I believe will have an important positive effect. As you know, Mr. Secretary, I've been screaming about this for the last 20 years, the fact that we have not had USAID presence in the Pacific until now. I look forward to Secretary Clinton's rescheduled trip to Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea, and as you mentioned in our discussions, her plans to stop in American Samoa as part of the trip, particularly as you indicated she was slated to do so originally. Following up in our discussions, I've also invited her to stop over, as I believe such a stop would support your efforts to strengthen U.S. Pacific Island relations and American Samoa's position as a regional leader. It would also give her the chance to thank the thousands of Samoan men and women serving in the armed forces during a year that will be marked both by rebuilding efforts and by the devastating earthquake and tsunami, and by the 110th year for which the U.S. flag was raised in American Samoa. Our people in the military services put their lives on the line every day in the most dangerous parts of the world. In fact, in Iraq, we have a higher per capita combat mortality rate than any other U.S. state or territory. I applaud Secretary Clinton for meeting her objectives to deepen our historical ties, build new partnerships, and work with existing multilateral organizations. And I sincerely hope, and as she had aptly stated, America's future is linked to the future of the Asia-Pacific region, and the future of this region depends on America. I'm very, very happy that we are joined here this afternoon by one of our distinguished colleagues and senior members of the Foreign Affairs Committee and our former ambassador to the FSM, my dear friend, Congresswoman Watson from California. She has an opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I feel this is a very timely hearing, so we can look to the state of affairs in East Asia and the Pacific, and Samoa is such an important part of that region, and I look forward to returning again. In these last few months, we have seen a considerable change in the region. Japan saw a shift in leadership for the first time in 50 years, from the Liberal Democratic Party to the Democratic Party of Japan. North Korea left negotiations and carried out a nuclear test. Though the administration has made some strides with respect to building a more positive relationship with China, there's a long way to go, increasingly complicated by the friction of the Sino-U.S. economic relations. With this changing environment in the region, it is important to reevaluate our strategy in order to maintain some stability. Therefore, I thank you, Secretary Campbell, for coming to answer our questions and to address some of these changing issues. I also, again, thank the Chairman, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Appreciate your testimony. And again, I am our subcommittee is very honored to have with us Assistant Secretary for East Asia Pacific Affairs, Secretary Campbell, to testify before our subcommittee. Secretary Campbell was appointed and nominated by President Obama, and he became Assistant Secretary in June of last year. A very distinguished record, history in the areas of the Asia-Pacific region, former Associate Professor of Public Policy and International Relations at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Dr. Campbell served in several capacities, also as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Asia-Pacific, also as a Director of the National Security Council staff, as a White House Fellow, an officer in the Navy. What hasn't he done? Received his bachelor's degree from the University of California in San Diego and his doctorate in international relations from Oxford University and Brasenose College, and a distinguished Marshall Scholar. Mr. Secretary, I again thank you for coming, and I'm going to give you the floor, and please share with us your wisdom, and I'm sure that my colleagues and I will have some questions and comments concerns the state of affairs as to what is happening out there in this important region of the world, Asia-Pacific region. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Watson. Thank you both for your leadership on these issues and your commitment. I cannot imagine a more timely hearing than to discuss American strategy and our commitments in the Asian-Pacific region. Before I get started, I'd like to ask that my full testimony be submitted for the record. It's rather lengthy and detailed, and I don't want to read it. I'd rather us have a conversation, so I'd just like...
Without objection, and any other ancillary materials you'd like to submit for the record, Mr. Secretary, you're more than welcome.
Thank you. I will do so. Mr. Chairman, I think the truth of the matter is the United States faces both challenges, real challenges, but also opportunities in the Asian-Pacific region. And now we have the opportunity to look back over the last year to what we've accomplished and some of the things that we'd like to work on in the time ahead. First of all, let me say that one of the most significant issues that we deal with is that when we look back on this period in 20 or 30 years, I think there will be no doubt that although we are importantly engaged in Iraq and Afghanistan and issues in South Asia, the truth is, I think, really the fulcrum of history, the most dynamic region of the world, the most important issues for our prosperity and our role in global politics, those issues are playing out in the Asian-Pacific region. It's absolutely essential that the United States convey to the key players in the Asian-Pacific region that we are here to stay and that we're going to play a dynamic and continuing role in all aspects of foreign policy, national security, the promotion of human rights and our values, trade, economics in the region going forward. It's absolutely essential. And I have to say, Mr. Chairman, there really wasn't a word in your statement or yours, Ms. Watson, that I would disagree with. I think I would associate myself very strongly with everything that you have said. You will have noted that from the outset of the administration, Our senior team, the President, the Secretary, and other senior officials, Secretary Gates and others, have tried to make clear, not only with their words, but their actions about their strong commitment to the region. Secretary Clinton's first visit as Secretary of State was to the Asian Pacific region. During the first year in her capacity as Secretary of State, she visited the region 4 times, and she will have a similar record in the period ahead. She has taken enormous steps, not just in Northeast Asia, but also in Southeast Asia as well. And I must also say that she has a vision of drawing India, a critical country for the United States, one of the arriving nations in global politics, to bring India more closely into our discussions and our dialogue associated with critical issues in the Asian Pacific region. President Obama visited important visit to Southeast Asia for APEC, also the first ever, as the chairman indicated, U.S.-ASEAN Summit in Singapore, and also important discussions with our friends in Japan and South Korea, and I think an important visit to China as well. In the coming weeks, he will be making another visit to Asia, where he will stop in Guam, an American protectorate, and the chairman has given us excellent advice about how to think about that trip, and also stops in Indonesia, where he spent time as a young person, and Australia as well. And we're looking forward to that, and I think it's another opportunity to reaffirm our strong commitment to the region as a whole. We face not only traditional challenges of the kind that we've faced for decades, questions about an uncertain set of circumstances on the Korean Peninsula. We still face challenges there. We have the responsibility of the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, and we also face the challenge of terrorism in Southeast Asia in various forms. But in addition, we face new challenges, such as the challenge of climate change. Some of our partners and friends in the region believe that this is one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century. I would concur with that assessment, and I know that will be one of the issues that the President and the Prime Minister in Australia will be discussing in a couple of weeks' time. In some specifics, Mr. Chairman, I would say that, as you indicate, we have a new government in Japan, really the first fundamental transition in government power in Japan in over half a century. We are working very closely with our partners in the new government, and I must underscore that they have taken several steps that the United States deeply appreciates. Today, they are the largest supporter of assistance to Afghanistan. They've stepped up in a big way, in many respects more significant and substantial investments than some of our traditional partners in Afghanistan. They've been very supportive in the wake of the Copenhagen meetings in terms of following through with credible steps in terms of trying to deal with the potential consequences of climate change. We are also working closely on issues associated with our security relationship, and I must tell you, Mr. Chairman, like you, I am confident that we will find a way forward to work through our issues on Okinawa. We share many of the same goals. We want to reduce the burden on the people of Okinawa, but at the same time, we believe the maintenance of American forces in Japan is a cornerstone of our commitment to the Asian Pacific region. The only thing I would disagree with, you said our relations with Korea are the best they've been in 10 years. I would say, how about ever? This is the best I've ever seen relations between Washington and Seoul. The summit that I witnessed between our two leaders was the best I've ever experienced, and I must say we are deeply grateful for the very substantial commitment that we get on a range of issues from our South Korean friends. Their recent commitment to Afghanistan, their increase in support for a variety of investment and humanitarian assistance in the Asian Pacific region and elsewhere is much appreciated. I think you and others have rightly underscored the challenge of the relationship with China. We'll have much more to discuss about that in the question and answer. I would just simply say that we recognize that this is probably the most complicated and complex relationship that the United States deals with on a daily basis. There are going to be issues that we work closely on. There are going to be issues that we need to cooperate, but there are also going to be issues on which the United States and China disagree. We are working closely with our friends in Beijing on a range of issues currently. At the top of the list are critical issues to the United States, and I would argue, and we would argue to the global community, they include Iran, North Korea, climate change, and also continuing efforts to ensure that we are seeking a true recovery economically. There are a range of issues that our two sides deal with. As you've underscored, Mr. Chairman, we've had a recent period of some disagreements, but we're confident that we're going to be able to maintain positive momentum going forward. There is substantial ballast in our ship in U.S.-China relations, and we recognize the importance of this relationship. We are also committed to maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. You will have noted the steps that we've taken in this regard in recent weeks, and we stand by those. You've also seen a substantial increase in our commitments in Southeast Asia. We have a comprehensive partnership with Indonesia that the President will launch in a few weeks. Secretary Clinton underscored her commitment to the region through a Mekong Delta initiative. We have signed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. We are in deep discussion with our friends in Southeast Asia about the next steps associated with architecture. We talked about that, Mr. Chairman, when I met with you last week. Clearly, the United States wants to play a role in the multilateral institutional discussions in the region, and we'll have more to talk about in the near future. We are also engaged in a careful dialogue in Burma. We recognize the challenges there. We have not lifted our sanctions. We have very clear guidelines about how we'd like to proceed, and we call on the government there to continue to take steps to hopefully lead to a dialogue inside the country, and also to release political prisoners and to stop some of the violence against indigenous groups, including ethnic minorities, and of course the long-standing call on the part of the United States to release Aung San Suu Kyi. Our relationship with Australia is outstanding, and we've taken recent steps to make sure that we are working more actively with new government and new friends in New Zealand. And then again, as I underscored at the outset, Asia as a region is growing in many respects, and India's role in this respect is critical. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I would just say we have our work cut out for us, enormous challenges. The region still looks to the United States for leadership and for commitment, and we will continue to try to provide that as we move forward. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We are joined with us now the distinguished ranking member of our subcommittee, gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Manzullo, and I would like to offer him the time to, if he has an opening statement that he wishes to share with the committee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling this important hearing, and welcome, Mr. Secretary, to this hearing today. I recall with fondness the special relationship that we had with Ambassador Chris Hill, former Assistant Secretary of Asia, when he held the same position, and we know that we're going to have the same close working relationship with you. In fact, in April of this year, the ambassador from Thailand has come to my district to talk about Southeast Asia issues, and we're very much looking forward to that and sharing his insight with the students and faculty and the community at Rockford College. Asia-Pacific region is one of the most important areas of the world for the United States. Maintaining good relations in Asia are important not only for geopolitical reasons, but for its vital economic trade and jobs-related purposes as well. According to the East-West Center, Asia accounts for 27% of total exported-related jobs in America. Given the fact that America's export sector accounts for almost 40% of total gross domestic product, it is vital that we get our relationship with Asia correct. The congressional district I have the honor to represent depends heavily on exports and foreign direct investment to maintain the jobs that we desperately need. I want to thank the administration for doing a good job at managing broader U.S.-Asia relations. The administration's focus on Southeast Asia in particular is a step in the right direction. However, with regard to Burma, China, and Japan, the record is a little mixed. The administration needs to be tougher on Burma and scrap its misplaced efforts to engage the military junta. Burma's conviction of Ni Deong, an American citizen, on trumped-up political charges is the largest example for why we need to end this pointless engagement exercise. Burma will not change regardless of how much we want it to. And we've all followed the travails of Aung San Suu Kyi and the continuous harassment that she has had, and I think the administration needs to be a lot tougher on Burma. The administration needs to act more assertively with Beijing to ensure that America's interests are not negatively impacted. China continues with this business-as-usual attitude when it comes to important issues such as currency manipulation, intellectual property rights violations, and lack of religious freedom. Despite the administration's efforts to reset relations with China, it is clear the leaders of China care more about protecting their country's own interests than to forge a new relationship. The cyber attack on Google is a perfect example of this relationship imbalance, though to be sure, we have worked with China and seen just a little bit of good light with regard to intellectual property challenges, and know that they are engaged in that, but we really need more help from the U.S. government to encourage China to continue to protect intellectual property rights. Concerning Japan, the administration must act quickly to clearly lay out a long-term ramification of protracted uncertainty on basing in Okinawa. I strongly encourage the administration to make it crystal clear to the Japanese government that Congress expects it to honor a pre-existing agreement. I would also state that accompanying the ambassador from Thailand will be the ambassador from Japan, giving tremendous honor to Rockford College, appearing at a joint session dealing with economic viability in Asia and Southeast Asia. So we are very much interested in the State Department working in that area, and Mr. Secretary, very much interested in working with you on an even closer basis. And I know I can speak for my chairman, but we'd love to have coffee with you some morning with the members of our subcommittee and talk about a variety of issues. Is that correct, Chairman?
Absolutely.
I welcome it, and I've had the opportunity to do that with the chairman, and anytime we're available, and I do very much appreciate your support for this kind of endeavor.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to turn the time now to our good friend, the gentlelady from California, for her questions.
Thank you. In the State of the Union, the President also spoke of strengthening our relationship with Korea. And in her statement last week, Secretary Clinton also mentioned the importance of our Korea relationship. The budget request includes an economic support fund with $2.5 million for North Korea for democracy promotion and human rights programs. And in your statement, you noted that the administration is committed to building a more dynamic relationship with South Korea, and our ranking member also did. And can you expand on the plan, and how will you measure the effectiveness of your strategy, and what is the administration's posture on China's role in the Korean Peninsula, and are there plans for the Korean FDA? And believe me, in my brief trip last August, that was our #1 topic when we got to South Korea, the FDA. I have met with visiting delegations that have come from Korea, and we had to go there. We do an exchange. And I told them we probably wouldn't be able to take up the FDA last year, but we certainly are going, after we get past our other issues that we're dealing with now, we'll look at an FTA. They're very, very interested. So can you just bring us up?
Thanks very much.
These issues.
Thank you so much. Let me try to talk collectively on all the issues that we confront and our opportunities on the Korean Peninsula. Let me just say that the President mentioned the Korea Free Trade Agreement in the State of the Union. The Secretary has on several occasions, and When we met with President Im Myung-bak in Seoul in November, he made a very passionate and very committed plea to the United States to take this opportunity to engage with South Korea, and that South Korea had enormous opportunities with China and elsewhere, but this is really the opportunity for the United States to take an important step. And I found the argument extraordinarily persuasive. And I am optimistic that, as you indicate, that just as the President and the Secretary has said, that we will be taking this up in due course.
That I have the largest South Korean community in the whole United States, about 160,000. And Koreatown is right where my office is located. So I'm in dialogue with them all of the time. And one of their issues was the balance of trade. And we have to wait on our turn when we deal with these policies as a caucus on the floor. But I certainly am going to be doing all I can to see that we get to a good discussion and a policy. And I know that the chair is also very interested, and the ranking member too. So we're going to be doing all that we can.
Great. I appreciate that very much, Congresswoman. And I must say, when I've met with the chairman and other members, they've also made clear why they think this agreement would be good for Korea, very good for the United States. Clearly, there are probably some issues that have to be discussed, but overall, I think there's a deep appreciation about how important this is to American strategy, to American commitment in the region, and we take this very, very seriously. And I must say, I personally appreciate your commitment and support of this overall endeavor. In terms of North Korea, obviously we face enormous challenges. We are trying to put forward, as part of the six-party framework, an approach that makes very clear to North Koreans that they must come back to negotiations, they must commit to denuclearization, and must abide by the commitments they've made in the joint statement in 2005, and that's the essential next step. And I think we've been very patient, honestly, and I think Secretary Clinton's general concept of strategic patience has been applicable here. We are lockstep with South Korea, Japan, and other countries in our strategy and our desire to make sure that North Korea takes applicable steps to bring them in line with the commitments they have already made in 2005. At the same time, we remain very concerned about the human rights and the tragic circumstances that North Koreans continue to live under, brutal circumstances. And I have worked closely with your members, Senator Brownback and others on the other side of the other body on strategies for how the United States can support people, refugees and others who've left North Korea. We worked very closely with the South Korean government on efforts at assisting refugees to be resettled inside South Korea, and we're also looking at opportunities for educational exchange for newly arrived North Koreans who make the successful transition to South Korea to have the opportunity to come to the United States for purposes of study. This is a very real and challenging set of problems, and we accept them head on. The South Koreans are very generous in their support for resettlement, and we think our primary commitment in this regard is to support South Korea in this overall effort, but we take it seriously. We've had dialogues with China about steps that we'd like to see them take in assisting many of the people who flee North Korea go through China, and we think that's absolutely essential. We talk with Chinese friends about the Korean Peninsula, about North Korea, particularly in the venue of the six-party framework, and I think our general goal, of course, is to bring North Korea back in line with its earlier commitments associated with the six-party talk. Still, lots of work to be done and enormous challenges on the peninsula going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I use a few more minutes? I had some questions about Japan.
Sure.
Okay. The change in government from the Liberal Democratic Party to the Democratic Party of Japan has altered the U.S.-Japanese relations in the last year. And the planned relocation of the U.S. Marines Fatima Air Station to Okinawa has stalled. I was on the island of Okinawa many years ago for 2 years. And the reason why there wasn't a real big push to get us out of there is because we were about 95% of their economy. And the Okinawans worked in our residence, they worked in our PX, they worked in our officers' quarters, and so on. And so we had a pretty good feeling. But now I know things have changed, and I do read that there are demonstrations from time to time for us to leave. But what is the state of our security relationships with Japan in light of its geopolitical vulnerability to North Korea, and how does the new regime in Japan affect U.S.-Japan relationships with respect to global warming, six-party talks, and the upcoming Japanese hostess APEC summit?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. Again, critical questions about Japan. I would say that Japan is an essential partner of the United States in the Asian Pacific region. We just cannot accomplish nearly what we need to unless we have a strong partnership between Washington and Tokyo. We have tried to walk a careful path when it comes to Japan and our issues associated with Okinawa and other aspects of our security relationship. On the one hand, we've tried to be very firm and clear about what our expectations are and what we believe is essential for the maintenance of our mutual security and to best allow for the United States to play its role as the guarantor of peace and stability in the region. And at the same time, we expect a new government. It's natural to ask questions, to explore new opportunities and new choices. And it is incumbent on us as a partner to work with them through that process, not to be dictatorial, but to act as a partner, to listen and to consult, and that's what we're in the process of doing. Okinawa is very difficult politics, and we appreciate that and we understand it. We've made very clear to the central government that we still believe that the current plan that was negotiated several years ago is the best way forward. But at the same time, we remain open to other suggestions and ideas. But I must say many of these we've also looked at as well. We still think this is the best way forward. In addition to these issues, however, Japan is one of our closest allies on a range of issues, including steps to prevent and deal with global climate change. They are supportive of our endeavors in Afghanistan, and they are close partners when it comes to thinking about how to successfully engage North Korea. So I must say that I think some of the rhetoric and discussions about U.S.-Japan relationship is indeed, as the chairman said, a little bit overblown. This is one of our closest global partners, and frankly, we think that there is just a natural chemistry and a natural and strategic rationale for our two countries to work very closely together. And so we're trying to be patient and firm at the same time, and also clear about how critical we believe this relationship is as we go forward.
Thank the gentlelady from California. I have about 200 questions I wanted to ask you, Mr. Secretary.
We better get started quick then.
Short it down just to a couple, Mr. Secretary. Looking at in terms of the numbers, I believe you have quite a responsibility in this region of the world, and my guess tells me that you have a responsibility for well over 2-point-some billion people in terms of geographical responsibility. Am I correct on that, Mr. Secretary?
I'm not sure they would all feel that way, but I mean, in terms of the region, the region that I am working on does indeed extend from Japan all the way down to Australia and New Zealand. And it does encompass the largest population groups, the most dynamic economies, and some of the greatest challenges confronting global politics today.
I have a question for you concerning a country that is not even on the radar screen in terms of our national priorities and things that I believe that we really dropped the ball in not correcting some of these things that we've done wrongfully against these countries. First place, this country never attacked us. They never declared war against us. We're the ones that just simply went over there and bombed the heck out of them. And I'm talking about the country of Laos, Mr. Secretary. We dropped 270 million bombs in this country, approximately 2 million tons of bombs, out of which 80 million of these bomblets out of the cluster bombs failed to detonate. As a result of this bombing that we've done against Laos, some 50,000 Laotians died as a result of this. It's my understanding that one of the problems that we've had is that when our pilots, I believe, wherever they're bombing missions, whether it be up north, Vietnam or wherever, these pilots had to come and just drop them off, and it happens to be that poor Laos and Cambodia were caught. And my point that I wanted to share with you, a very serious concern, Mr. Secretary, total U.S. direct funding to help unexploded ordnance, Mr. Secretary. I'm talking about 80 million bombs that failed to detonate. We donated only $176,000 to do the cleanup. This is absolutely outrageous, and it's not the America that I would think of. Total U.S. donations to the UNDP, supposedly through the Damage Trust Fund, for some 11-year period, it's only $3.1 million. It would take approximately 100 years to complete this if this is the rate that we're spending or helping the Laotian government correct this, what I consider an injustice, really, on our part, and that we never seem to it just seems to just fly away and never seem to bother with it. The fact that this country, a small population of only 4 million people, and we are not giving the proper assistance that these people really need. Approximately 300 people, children and women especially, die as a result of getting hit with these unexploded ordnance. And I want to ask you, Mr. Secretary, is the State Department going to review this dismal record, in my opinion, on our part of these bombs that we dropped in this country, that we can make a little better donation in terms of how we can help clean up the place? Would you care to comment on that?
I would, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, and I thank you for your passion and commitment on this particular issue. I must also tell you that in my meetings with Senator Webb and others in the other House, they have also raised this issue with me. I will be in Laos next week, and I expect these issues to come up directly. I would like nothing more to be able to work with you to assist with my department to try to get some more support. I too believe that this is not only a critical issue strategically, but it's also a critical moral issue. And so I think it makes sense. Now, I want to tell a story on me that I don't think is particularly favorable, but it'll give you a sense of some of the challenges that we occasionally face at the State Department. One of my first briefings, still kind of learning the ropes, I had come from the Department of Defense, and we have a different set of zeros. And so very able, incredibly committed staff sort of briefing me on some foreign assistance efforts. And I'm looking at something, and I saw it. I said, well, this looks about right. I think, $22 million for this particular effort is correct. And there was kind of silence. And so finally, someone got up in the Kurd and said, well, actually, Kurd, it's $22,000, right? So we have some very real challenges here and lots of competition for scarce resources. But I must say, given Chairman Mr. Falamavingo, your commitments, Congressman, and Senator Webb's and others, I think there is room for a greater dialogue between the executive branch and our friends on Capitol Hill on this issue. And I must also say, I think a small amount of money can go a long way here.
I could not agree with you.
I think we are actually in violent agreement here. And I'd love to work with you to see what we can do going forward. Thank you.
I think that perhaps we spent almost $1 billion in building that embassy that we have in Baghdad. Over $900 million in building an embassy there for 15 million people that live in. I note with interest that the president is going to go to Indonesia this month. I know also, I don't know if you were aware that there was a national blog during the presidential election that I was special agent for then Senator Barack Obama to go to Indonesia, which I did, to go to the school that he attended when he was young, which I did. And my assignment was to make sure that there's no record whatsoever indicating that Barack Obama was born in Indonesia. Unbelievable. The birthers are really at it and really thinking that this is really the God-honest truth. But my concern, Mr. Secretary, this has been one issue that I've been following for years, and that's the situation in West Papua. I don't want to get into the history of how the Jakarta, or at that time, dictator Suharto just went over there and just took over West Papua by force, by military. And this thing that they did in getting 1,000 West Papuan chiefs to vote 100% to be with Indonesia was an absolute sham. There was no question. Even the United Nations observer that went there wrote a report saying that this was a sham. Latest that I'm trying to do is that the fact that the West Papuans are looking at a document that was supposedly to help them. It was called the Special Autonomy Law that the Indonesian government passed in 1991 on the Megawati, President Megawati. To this day, Mr. Secretary, I have no idea if the provisions of this Special Autonomy Law for West Papua has been implemented. I have every reason to believe they have not done anything to implement the provisions of this important law. And then there's also the latest development on, I think someone in the State Department or the Department of Defense are fully supportive of giving military training to Kopassus. Now, these are the police people there in Jakarta that there's been a lot of harm done against the West Papuans in terms of the Kopassus presence, not only in West Papua, but in Indonesia for what they've done against them. And I would appreciate if you could follow up on this and where we are with the needs of the people of West Papua.
Thank you,
I'm going to withhold my question. I want to give my good friend from California, Mr. Royce, if he has an opening statement or questions.
I do. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just make a couple of points. Asia right now is half of the world's economy, and of course, Asia is rather aggressively pursuing regional economic integration. I think the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, when they look at the trade agreements, they tally 168 agreements in force in Asia. We're party to merely 2 of those, Australia and Singapore. And so I am glad when I hear you say that the President is talking more about the importance of trade, but I think we need concrete action. I think, for example, the Korean-American Trade Agreement, KORUS, that would be one example. That agreement, basically the Europeans are stepping in and doing that same agreement while we're locked out. And that means that American workers and American consumers lose in the long run if we're not involved in engaging in these trade agreements in Asia. I think the second challenge here is to make human rights part of the strategic outlook. And that also concerns me, because whether we're talking about China or Vietnam or North Korea or Burma, and I think for a minute just about what I've seen in the last few months in Vietnam and the crackdowns there and the press reports that come across our desk. There's 17 activists that were convicted in one-day show trials. There are some 200,000 political prisoners, if we're talking about North Korea, who are rotting away in the gulags there. We all monitor China's assaults on individual freedom and on free speech of their citizens, and what's happening in Burma concerns us all. I think that we often get caught up in the question of the here and now. Will China sign on to Iran sanctions? What is North Korea's latest demand? And what we're missing is the big picture. We're missing that often these abuses against their own people are more indicative of the direction in which these countries are headed, and frankly, the need for us to do more to hold them to account. And that needs to be better ingrained in our policy, and I'll give you an example. As far as putting Vietnam back on the list of countries of particular concern. I would say at a time when the Commission for International Freedom gives us the report about what is happening to the Catholic Church, what is happening to detentions and threats and harassment and violence by what they call contract thugs against religious leaders, at a time when police officers beat and shock prisoners with electric batons, according to the Human Rights Watch, at a time when the Buddhist church is terrorized by undercover police and by local communist officials, and it's across the board, whether it's Protestant or Buddhist or Catholic. Now is the time, in light of these abuses, to relist Vietnam on the CPC list. Now, legislation I've authored has gone over into the Senate to attempt to affect that, but these are steps that you, frankly, could take and should take, and I'll ask you about that. And then I'm also concerned about the Philippines. I'm concerned about the elections there. I've been engaged in the past in these election observer efforts overseas, and elections in May are approaching there. Past polls have been hampered, of course, by accusations of corruption. And I've heard from the Filipino community in Southern California that they're concerned about that upcoming election and that it may be similarly hampered if there aren't election observers. So I'd ask you, what is being done to lay the groundwork for this election, whether it's observers or other actions, to help ensure a fair process? Is NDI, IRI, are these institutions going to be there on the ground to help monitor? And I'd appreciate your response.
Thank you very much, Congressman Royce, and thank you for coming today. On the first point, let me just say that when you travel around Asia and spend time in Asia, the Asian friends look to us for many things. They are grateful and appreciative for our role as the provider of peace and stability. Our forward deployed forces play a critical role in the prosperity that region has enjoyed for the last 2 generations. They are also supportive of our deep commitments to democracy and human rights. And I think if you look at one of the great achievements of American foreign policy, it is the trend of democratization and the greater respect for human rights. And you see that in countries like South Korea, Indonesia, and other countries in Southeast Asia. So I accept that very clearly. But it is also the case that Asian friends really look to the United States to be a leader on economic issues and on trade. And that is just undeniable. That is something that in every meeting I have with my Asian interlocutors, the issue of what the American commitment is in this respect. Now, I think the President has tried to say a couple of things, and I think the administration is trying to work on others. He has, in almost all his senior meetings, Congressman, tried to underscore that there is going to have to be a rebalancing of sorts between Asia and the United States going forward. That over time, first of all, it's not going to be possible to return to what we might call the status quo antebellum, whereby very inexpensive Asian capital comes into the United States under good terms, and that we buy relatively inexpensive Asian products, leading to a massive trade imbalance. That as we go forward, the United States is going to have to save more, and Asians are going to have to buy more American goods. And that's absolutely clear, and that in particular, we've got to see some of the big economies stepping up to assist in this respect. I think that what we are seeing, both with the Korea Free Trade Agreement and the TPP formula, are prospects and possibilities of substantial improvements in American economic performance in the Asian Pacific region. So I'm with you. I support that, and I think that's the right way forward. I must also say, and I think you appreciate this, in the current environment, I mean, the President has made very clear it's hard sometimes to defend and explain trade when you're dealing with very substantial problems associated with unemployment. But nevertheless, I do believe that this is a strong area.
Let me interject there and say that there's some estimates that 345,000 jobs could be lost if Europe comes in on this trading agreement with Korea and the United States does not. So I understand the rhetorical position there, that it's hard to argue this point, but at the same time, if we're left out of trade agreements and Europe fills the breach, that means the loss of jobs.
Congressman, I will tell you very clearly, many of our Asian friends have made the point that this is a closing window. They want the United States in the game. And I must say, the challenge is not just from Europe. It's from China. It's from other countries. And it's a very real and deep challenge. And I think one of the arguments that we've got to be clear about is the one issue that I would disagree with you on is I think you can't look at this picture in terms of Asia in its totality. You've got to break it up. There are components of Asia and of our trade agreements that are very good for the United States, and there's some areas that are much more challenging. Obviously, China is in a very challenging position. But Australia, we have a very substantial surplus, and many studies of other trade agreements or prospective trade agreements suggest that they could be very good for the United States. So I think you're
and let's move on because I wanted to quickly get your thoughts on the Philippine election.
Yeah.
If we could on that.
Thank you. I mean, look, we have some history with Philippine elections. They are periods that require greater American and international vigilance in advance of those elections. We are taking those steps, and we are doing a variety of things, let me just say. One, we are trying to keep our ears open. We hear lots of reports, and we think it's important to make sure that we have a good sense of what's going on the ground. And we're looking at, the new voting machines, all those things. We have very high-level dialogue with our excellent ambassador and others, with the Filipino governments, with the appropriate authorities about what our expectations are in terms of the upcoming election. And we also expect that there will be substantial external observers, including those from the United States. And there is a discussion between not just the Republican National Institute and the Democratic National Institute, but other groups as well associated with the United Nations. So I think we have enough warning, enough knowledge, and also the Philippines is so important to us. It's critical that this election go through in a smooth way, in a way that Filipinos and Americans can be proud and work together going forward.
And the CPC list, as it affects Vietnam, countries of particular concern, given the
I'm aware of your letter, Congressman, and what I'd like to ask is the opportunity to get back to you in due course. This is an issue that will be taken up in the next several weeks in the United States government. I must say we face a very real challenge in the Asian Pacific region on some of these issues. One of the great concerns is that we have I would say, a bit of a dichotomy with Vietnam. Very real concerns about backsliding on issues of human rights and religious issues in recent years. But at the same time, this is a government that sees that it wants a closer relationship with the United States for strategic reasons. One of the things that we've tried to argue with them, it's going to be very hard to have that kind of relationship unless they take specific steps to improve the situation at home. And so I understand that, and I guess what I'd like is a little bit more time to be able to process. I'm going to be in the region next week. I will have some specifics, and I would promise, if you'll allow me, to get back directly in touch with you.
I will, certainly, Assistant Secretary Campbell. I would just ask you to remember, unless we exert leverage, given what has happened there in terms of human rights abuses and the way they basically took advantage of a situation to then clamp down and beat senseless a lot of pro-democracy, and not even just pro-democracy activists. We're talking about everything from young people using the internet to Buddhist monks who simply want to practice their faith. And I've been in Vietnam and talked to some of these political prisoners about what they faced and what's happened to their countrymen, including the loss of life on the part of some of the Buddhists in Vietnam as a result of these beatings. So let's exert a little leverage in this, and we can do it with a CPC list. And thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Campbell. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlelady from California.
I want to move to the environment, and I'm so pleased and proud to see that the Secretary also went down to Chile. And we witnessed this weekend probably an earthquake in Chile of biblical proportions. I mean, I think in many ways it was worse than the one in Haiti. And that earthquake led to hundreds of deaths like it did in Haiti. and also threaten Pacific islands and nations in direct danger of a massive tsunami. And Hawaii and Japan both waited with bated breath as swollen waves passed by their respective shores. Clearly, tsunamis pose potential collateral damage to many islands and ports, even when the epicenter of disaster are far off. And it looks like we're really having trouble in our Pacific areas. So what plans are underway to improve forecasting, detection, preparation, and evacuation? And I did see the Secretary saying that she bought equipment for communications and so on. So if you could just extend that for us. There have been reports of repression, so on, of ethnic minorities in Burma. Well, let's have you deal with Chile, and then we'll go on to Burma.
Thank you very much. Congressman Watson, I think that when it comes to certain kinds of natural disasters, typhoons, earthquakes, and the like, the United States has a multifaceted strategy for how to try to deal with these challenges. And the truth is we've learned a lot since 2004, since the tragic tsunami hit Indonesia and other countries in Southeast Asia. First, there's now a much more comprehensive set of sensors on the floor of the Pacific and using other instruments that allow us to better predict how and when a seismic event might lead to tragic tsunami-like waves.
Let me just ask you to put a pin in that. We went to Aceh afterwards, and there was a gentleman there who had predicted this level of tsunami and so on, and I think that he was criticized and really fired from his job. So after it hit, and there was so much destruction, in fact, we flew over by helicopter, and we just saw ripples in the water where islands have been. And they couldn't even tell the number of people because the last time they took the census, there had been babies born, just swept off of the globe. And so they found him to be right. So he was the one that was on the air. We heard his predictions and all. And I see that our secretary, as I mentioned, took communication equipment over. So I'm just wondering if the people are more in tune with the forecast.
Well,
and
yes.
Go ahead.
I think the problem in parts of Indonesia and Malaysia and elsewhere is that there was insufficient warning and, in fact, knowledge. This complex sensor system that has now been activated in the Pacific gives us a much greater clarity and more warning time. So you will recall after the Chilean earthquake, we had several hours in which to prepare in Hawaii and other American protectorates, and we got the word out to Japan and other countries. And so I would say in many respects the recent event indicates that our preparedness has improved substantially. If I can mention just one last thing, Congresswoman, but the truth is what we have to be prepared is to respond. What we've had are horrible rains in the Philippines this year, terrible cyclones, other situations in Guam, in American Samoa and elsewhere.
In California.
That's right. But,
my state.
But in the Pacific, by far and away, despite all the discussion about rising powers, it's been the United States, by more than any other country, that's been able to provide humanitarian assistance, to get our forces there on the scene rapidly, and to provide necessary steps towards recovery. And we're very proud of that. And I think that record of the last 6 to 8 months in this respect is quite substantial, and we intend to keep those efforts up as we move forward.
I know that on one of the Hawaiian islands, they did have a system, and at the time of the tsunami hitting within that region of Aceh, the system had not been completed around to that side of the delta. So you're informing us now that they have completed it.
I don't know about every aspect of it, but there are almost all the critical components, and these are sensors on the bottom of the Pacific that are able to detect shifts in pressure, that they are now in place.
Okay.
And so they were able to track very clearly what were the tidal aftermath of the seismic event on the shore of Chile. Yes.
And I hear that in the Hawaiian Islands, they hardly had a wave.
Yeah, well, the truth is that there was a lot of questions about whether in Hawaii the emergency authorities overreacted and that put people on higher ground and in various safe areas. I think that kind of question is just wrong. Clearly, it's much better to take steps that potentially prepares for the worst, and if it doesn't occur, it's a few hours of inconvenience. And so I was very proud of the steps that both the government of Hawaii and other parts of the Pacific as well, and our Pacific commanders took important steps to ensure that we were well prepared.
Well, the tragedy there on Achi was the fact that the waves come in and then they recede, and children and fishermen ran to pick up the fish that were, and then here comes the water, 500 miles an hour, and I think many people saw the pictures of boats up against the hillsides.
Horrific, yeah.
30 to 40 feet high, hotels, just flooded that had 5 and 6 floors. So it's better to be over-prepared and get to higher land than to allow
I agree. Thank you, Congressman.
nature to take over. Okay. Thank you.
We're also joined by another distinguished member of the committee, my good friend, the gentleman from California, Mr. Rob Rocker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, just a couple of questions on a couple little areas here. I noticed in your overview that you've stated that restrictions on the Export-Import Bank, I guess it is U.S. Export-Import Bank financing of U.S. companies, the prohibition on them from doing business in Laos and Cambodia have been lifted. And I know that Cambodia does have now opposition parties. There has been some freedom of speech, even though he's still in the grip of a tough guy who is less than democratic. But Laos, are there any opposition parties permitted in Laos?
Let me say that, as you know well, Congressman, we have very real challenges of governance in many parts of Southeast Asia. We believe that it is in American interest, given the nature of some of the strategic challenges, economic challenges that we face in the Asian-Pacific region, that we need to step up our engagement in Southeast Asia. And to do it carefully and not to in any way send a message that the United States does not care about the...
Well, maybe you can tell us the progress that you've seen in Laos. You say you've taken the step now to eliminate the prohibition from the U.S. Export-Import Bank in financing business investments in Laos. What are the steps that you can point to? Do they have freedom of religion there? Do they have freedom of the press? Have they ceased, can you tell us now that they've ceased their persecution of the Hmong people? Are any of those things you can point to?
I would try to answer that question this way, Congressman. I do believe that one of the missions of American engagement on the business side, that when the United States is involved responsibly in terms of our business activities in Southeast Asia, that our values go with it. And so I do believe that there is a desire in Laos, a careful one, to have a better relationship with the United States. I also agree with you completely that they're at the very earliest stages of any kind of progress in some of the issues that you and I care about. But the truth is, it's only been a couple of years, only a few years ago, that Laos had almost no interest in the outside world. And to the extent that they had outside external engagement was primarily with China. And so they have said, look, they want to develop a careful relationship with the United States. The truth is, Congressman, this is not like we're opening the floodgates.
Yeah, but you have made a
I'm sorry, let me just get it. This is just meant to be a very careful initial step to see if we can begin some progress. I share many of your concerns about the domestic situation inside the country, but at the same time, I feel very strongly that the United States needs to step up its game in Southeast Asia.
Mr. Secretary, my suggestion to you is that if if indeed we move forward and take a step like ending this prohibition on the export-import bank financing, and we don't expect something specific to see, a freedom to press, freedom of religion, opposition parties, well, then we have sent exactly the wrong message to dictatorships. And if the only thing they have to do is treat the American ambassador better and have little teas and things for us, that is not the right message. It's how they treat their people, not how they curtsy up and kiss American diplomats on the cheek. Let's go to China. We've had a one-way free trade relationship with China for a number of years. Most of us would think that that has been unacceptable, and it's resulted in $1 trillion of wealth being transferred from our country to their country. Your administration is not responsible for this. You are responsible for what happens now. The Clinton and Bush administrations before you are responsible for maintaining that policy, especially the Clinton administration, which made most favored nation status with China a permanent situation. We also now see that they continue to steal our technology. There's been massive transfers of technology, making them more competitive, even with our businesses that have stayed here. And we now see a major buildup of their military. Still, they have no free press, no opposition parties. People are still being arrested for their religious convictions, etc. In China, what does the administration, what specific things are we demanding of the Chinese for us not to start trying to call into question this one-way free trade that we permitted?
Thank you, Congressman. Well, first of all, let me just say that I think the President, our Secretary, and others have been very clear that for the United States to have a effective relationship in the Asian-Pacific region, particularly with China, there needs to be rebalancing, and that we cannot return to a situation where Asians provide relatively cheap credit to the United States and that we buy inexpensive goods from Asia. That we can't return to that status quo antebellum, and that the United States must save more in this process, and we must be able to export more to China going forward. Now, there are a whole host of discussions that are ongoing on issues associated with trade and currency, which are really not part of my purview, but I will say there's a deep understanding that the current situation is in imbalance, and that there will need to be, as the President indicated, some rebalancing going forward. We've stated clearly that we believe that the relationship with China is important. We're trying to work with China on a range of issues, including on climate change, on Iran, on North Korea, and the like. But at the same time, we're trying to send a very clear message that we will stand by our issues that are in American strategic interest and our core values. So you will have noted a few weeks ago that we made one of the largest sales as demanded by the Taiwan Relations Act to Taiwan. We've also had an important meeting, a spiritual meeting with the Dalai Lama, and we will continue to take steps, as Secretary Clinton did, to speak out on issues like internet freedom. I think we recognize that this is a relationship that's going to have elements where we probably are going to be able to work together, hopefully effectively, but there's going to be areas that we're going to continue to have substantial disagreement as we go forward.
Is our country still accepting the designation of the Uyghurs as being terrorists?
I think there was a specific organization during the Bush administration, I believe it was in 2002 or 2003, that was deemed on a particular list. Congressman, I do not know the status of that now, and I will get back to you on that.
One last question, Mr. Chairman. That is, the Falun Gong are clearly the object of repression in China. And we have documented many stories of people being picked up, and whatever it is that the Communist Chinese government there, or just say the Chinese dictatorship, however you want to label it, has focused in on the Falun Gong. Christians don't have freedom of religion. Muslims don't. The Tibetans don't. but the Uyghurs don't. But the Falun Gong, they definitely don't have rights there, and they're being picked up. What have we done, for example, have we investigated the charge that the Falun Gong has made that some of their people have been arrested and that there have been human body parts sold from the prisons in which their people were incarcerated?
Congressman, I actually don't know about that issue, and I would add that also to the list, and I promise I will get back to you directly. I know we've raised issues of human rights with Chinese authorities, and on this particular issue, I'm just not aware of the information. I'll get back to you.
You've been here. You've been here first year. You know, we got the first year under your belt.
7 months for me.
7 months for you. We're looking forward to working with you.
Thank you.
And I would hope that this administration takes advantage of the opportunities we have to come to grips with some of the challenges in these relationships that I've outlined in my question. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank the gentleman from California. I do have a couple of questions, Mr. Secretary. Please be patient. I believe it was last year that our government, I think it was co-sponsorship between the Department of Defense as well as the Department of State. It was called the Pacific Partnership Program, where I think it was almost a Mercy Hospital vessel that was taken all over the Pacific, for which we had scores of doctors and trainers and everything of the sort, visiting about 6 or 7 different island countries and gave vaccinations and medical treatment for these different island groups. And I would like to suggest to the administration to please continue the program. My only concern is, I've said this to some of our friends in the administration, have to wait another 40 years for something like this to happen? It's a positive program. It's never been done before, and I would strongly admonish the administration to continue the program. I think it goes a long way to help that. In following what Congressman Royce had stated earlier about the free trade agreement with South Korea, we've all known that one of the problems that was mentioned as an issue was auto parts, if that was mainly what was raised by our friends from the Michigan delegation. The thing that I see as a positive feature of the free trade agreement with South Korea, you're talking about potential exports from our country between $11 to $20 billion, which means more jobs, exports going to this country. We don't have to worry about labor issues. We don't have to worry about health hazards. And I was just wondering that now for this whole period, what is the administration's position? Are we serious in continuing the dialogue or negotiation with the South Korean government to pass the free trade agreement between South Korea and the United States?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And I think you know that the Pacific Partnership Program was extraordinarily successful. It's one of several initiatives that we've tried in the Pacific in recent years that, frankly, have exceeded our most optimistic expectations in terms of success. Let me give you another one. We have an Ocean Rider program whereby many of the Pacific Island nations have vast territorial seas in which there are sometimes illegal fishing and other acts that are done in these areas that are antithetical to their interests, but they can't patrol, they can't protect their natural resources. When a national from their military or Coast Guard or other authority rides on an American ship, we are then able, with their authority, to actually stop and to sometimes take action against those that are violating fishing rights and the like. And with the fines and others that have come from this program, it has been terrifically successful for a number of states in the South Pacific, and your staff has been instrumental in helping this program, and we look to continue it going forward.
I might also mention, Mr. Secretary, that there is the latest development now among certain Pacific Island nations, about 5 or 6, the Solomons, FSM, the Marshalls, Papua New Guinea, wanting to establish some kind of a cartel similar to APEC, but controlling the sale and the catch of tuna. And you're talking about a $4 billion industry that doesn't go to the benefit of these island nations. So they're now organized, what's called the Nauru Agreement is the latest development. A summit was recently held about 2 weeks ago in Palau, for which these certain island nations really want to establish an APEC-like organization so that they could get some of the benefits. The problem here is that most of the fishing is done by foreign countries and foreign companies. They get pittance as far as the results. Of course, my own little territory is impacted by the fact that we, at one time, processed tuna there for the largest processor in the world. No longer. Thailand is now doing this, and definitely I want to work with your office concerning the Oceans Program, see how we can help the island nations to develop this.
I agree with that, Chairman. I would just say that I think our goals in this respect are twofold. Not only do we want to see more of the profits go to the islanders, but at the same time, I think we have to recognize this is one of the last stocks of healthy tuna in the world, and that we have a really critical responsibility to make sure that this fishing resource is treated in a way that it allows for the best ability to sustain this critical natural resource going forward. If I can, just on the, I do believe, as I indicated, the meetings between President Mbak and President Obama left me quite optimistic. I think the President stated very clearly of his desire to have necessary discussions going forward. They didn't put a particular timetable at that juncture, but I believe that the U.S. government and the Korean government will take the appropriate steps in the near future. And I'm still quite confident that we will get this agreement done. I know how important it is to Korea, but I also think increasingly it's very important to the United States. And I accept very clearly some of the statements that you and others have made about the potential benefits that will come to the United States.
On the Korean issue, and especially with the situation dealing with North Korea, I make an observation. I know that our policy is to try to tell North Korea to cut its nuclear program. How do you denuclearize a country that already has nuclear bombs, may I ask, Mr. Secretary? And are we consistent in terms of our policy in putting such a pressure on North Korea? Did we do it against Pakistan? Did we do it against India? I don't think so. But what I wanted to find out from you is that is this really the basis that we think that North Korea is that unstable that we have to denuclearize that country?
Well, first
when
of all,
they already have the nuclear bombs, about
look,
8 or 9, I believe.
The truth is, Mr. Chairman, there are examples in global politics of countries that have willingly given up nuclear weapons because they believe that they find themselves in a better circumstance strategically after that. And I would put in that category, although Libya never made it to the final step, but Libya abandoned its nuclear programs. South Africa did, the Ukraine did, other countries as former parts of the Soviet Union that had major sort of components associated with the Soviet nuclear arsenal. And so I first of all think that it is entirely appropriate for the international community in the United States to call for denuclearization in North Korea, not simply because we have concerns about North Korea, and those are very real. We've seen them proliferate a vast amount of equipment and capabilities that are antithetical to global maintenance of peace and stability. We have concerns about many of the actions that they've taken, and we have concerns about the very nature of their government. Also, I think an acknowledged nuclear state in Northeast Asia would pose very significant challenges to the maintenance of the kind of relationships we want with both Japan and South Korea. So no, I'm completely comfortable, and I think that the approach that we've taken is the appropriate one, and we've made very clear that if North Korea wants to join the family of nations, if they want to work with us on economic growth, on greater integration in the booming economies of Northeast Asia, then they must take several steps. One of them is denuclearization. We also want to see progress on specific economic and also human rights issues, and we think that is the appropriate approach. And I must tell you, Congressman, on this issue, we have rock-solid support from South Koreans, Japanese, and others as we go forward.
I'm a little puzzled to the extent that probably I'm one of the few members who's ever been to the Marshall Islands, where we bombed that island archipelago to bits and pieces. We detonated 67 nuclear bombs in the Marshall Islands, the first hydrogen bomb. To this day, we still have not done justice to these people, and I really would like to work with you in making sure that we give better treatment of these people in the Marshall Islands, and we still have not done justice to that. I also visited the island of Motoroa, where the French government detonated some 220 nuclear weapons or nuclear bombs in the atmosphere and the surface and below the surface. And just really, really one of those episodes, I think it was 2 years ago, I was invited by the president of Kazakhstan, where I visited Semipalatinsk, where the Soviet Union exploded its first atom bomb in 1949, and guess what? That place is still radiated since 1949, where the Soviet Union detonated 450 nuclear devices, including the most powerful hydrogen bomb ever exploded. It was not in Kazakhstan, but some 1.5 million Kazakhs ended up being exposed to the horrors of nuclear radiation, just as what happened to the Japanese when we dropped the bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So my sense of contradiction, I just wanted to share with you. On the one hand, we're telling these countries not to develop nuclear weapons, but the 5 permanent members of the Security Council continue to have their own nuclear weapons. And my question is it right for these 5 permanent members of the Security Council to tell the rest of the world not to have nuclear bombs, but it's okay for them to have it? That's where I'm a little puzzled myself. I can understand about deterrence. I can understand about making sure that we're always prepared and dealing with a position of strength and all of that. But I can't see why even Iran, why they're motivated to develop an atomic bomb, because Israel has one, even though they will never admit or deny it. Then the Arabs may want to have a bomb too. So it goes on, and where will it stop, or when will it stop? And of course, then the Al-Qaeda or the terrorists will stop at nothing, and hopefully that they will get a bomb that can just be taken by a suitcase and called a little dirty bomb that's just as bad, if not worse. So I'm just wanting to walk me through how it's possible for some countries to continue to have nuclear weapons, but the rest of the world cannot.
Let me try, if I can, Congressman, just to make 3 points, and that's we've gone a little further afield in terms of our specific patch here, but let me try to...
Well, North Korea...
No, let me try to specifically suggest. I think one of the things that President Obama has underscored, and he's been very much influenced by some elder statesmen, many of whom served during the Cold War and others, and he believes, as do many others, that it is absolutely critical on the part of the United States, and indeed other leading nations, to reduce the significance of nuclear weapons in our global strategy. And I think you will see at the upcoming nuclear summit and through a variety of other programs and policies in the United States that we are attempting to do that. We are trying to diminish the role of nuclear weapons in our global strategy. At the same time, we recognize that these weapons have been invented, they exist. The most important deal, if you will, the arrangement that is underscored in the Non-Proliferation Treaty is that at the same time that the established nuclear weapons must reduce their arsenals in order to ensure that other states do not try to build them. We have seen one part of the arrangement essentially fulfilled, but as you underscore, the arsenals over the Cold War of the United States and the Soviet Union went up. You're going to see some specific steps, hopefully after an agreement with Moscow, that the United States and Russia will reduce its nuclear arsenals. And so I actually think that is a very important step as part of fulfilling this essential bargain. And we think strengthening the Non-Proliferation Treaty is an essential component to global security. And
especially with 90% of the nuclear weapons now in possession of both the Russians as well as us. So
I accept that. I accept that. I think we have to reduce those. And we also recognize the very real worries about a nuclear weapon that would end up in the hands of a terrorist. Now, on the specific issues of the legacy issues in the Pacific, I must say I agree with you. I think the United States has some unique responsibilities associated with dealing with some of the horrific challenges, but also the enduring commitments to the Pacific region. When we've met before, I've underscored to you, I think when people say Asia-Pacific, they focus more on the former than on the latter. And I think, see how we do. But I will say, I've been in here 7 months. We've got a new, AID office in the Asia-Pacific. We're going to try to work on the compacts. We're going to try to make sure we have high-level visits. We need to work with these countries and these places on climate change and on continuing issues of health and HIV. Those are continuing challenges of the United States, and we cannot shirk these responsibilities. And I would add to them the challenges of the Marshall and Bikini and the like. And so I hope that I will be a good partner for you in this endeavor, Congressman, and I share your sense of concern about these historical matters.
Mr. Secretary, I know you've been very patient, and I deeply appreciate your patience and all the questions that have been raised, and deeply appreciate your presence. And I wish you all the best on your upcoming trip, and please, let's do this again. Thank you very much.
Let you know how things go. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Hearing is adjourned.